Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Heather and today we're here with another tier ranking video. This time we are tier ranking all of the classics that I have read and remember enough to have thoughts on. I have definitely read more classics than I've added to this list, but I have simply pared it down to the ones that I remember good enough to have thoughts and opinions on. I definitely started reading classics at a very early age, and so there are a lot of classics that I definitely need to do a reread of because I just don't really have much memory of reading them. My history with classics, I guess I've read classics for a long time. My parents were really good about reading us classics as kids. I definitely got into reading classic literature really heavy in middle school, which is super random and definitely probably not typical, but if you remember AR points, we were required to read a certain number of AR or to get a certain number of AR points every quarter at my middle school. And so what I would do is I'd go and find the biggest book that I could that was worth all of the AR points that I had to read for that quarter. I would do that book and take the test, and then I could just be done with it and read whatever I wanted. So that is why I read a lot of classics in middle school specifically, because I was trying to get my AR points out of the way. Some of these books are I've read them a long time ago, and some of these books are ones that I've read more recently, but I put them in to my tier maker thing. So I'm going to go ahead and get the screen recording going and we will just start talking through my books and my tiers. First, let's walk through what my tiers are for this video. I tried to do some classic references and then I just kind of ran out of creativity. So 3 of them are classic references and the other ones are not. But for my top tier, I did Best of Times, if you get the reference. I also have Worst of Times down there at the bottom. But those are my absolute favorite classics. Potentially a lot of those are ones that I've already reread. That's what's going to go in my top tier. My second one is Second Breakfast. These are books that I loved and I really enjoyed, but they're maybe not my first pick. And then middle tier is classic for a reason. I feel like there are a lot of books that I maybe didn't enjoy so much. They're not books that I just love and obsess over, but I definitely can see why they're classic literature. And I do feel like everybody should read them at some point, but they maybe weren't ones that I would read just for fun again. Maybe for someone else is for the category of books that I can see how somebody else might like it, but there was something specific about it that I just personally didn't enjoy. And then obviously my last tier, Worst of Times. Those are the ones that I just did not enjoy and I don't recommend to anyone. So those are my tiers. These books are in no particular order. We're just going to go with the order that they ended up in here. So we're starting off with A Wrinkle in Time. Also, I guess I should preface if they're a whole series, I just picked either the first book or the most popular book of the series to kind of represent the series as a whole. I have read all 5 books in the Wrinkle in Time world. I guess it'd be considered a series. I would say the first book is probably a Best of Times. Let me see if I can get it to go. I do really enjoy the first book. The other books are a little hit and miss for me. I guess I could have put them in there and separated them out. I think overall I really love the series and I really love this author and her work in general. If you don't know, Wrinkle in Time's like a sci-fi, probably closer to middle grade YA series. There's the main book I feel like has gotten the most popular. They've made a movie out of it and stuff like that. But then the other ones follow the other siblings having adventures in various different types of realities. One of them, they go back in time and end up running into Noah's Ark and his family. One of them, he ends up inside the microscopic biome of somebody. It's they're super random. They do get a little bit more confusing going into the series. I feel like Wrinkle in Time is definitely the one that makes the most sense and is easiest to follow. But I do really, really enjoy the series. I have read Wrinkle in Time a couple of times. I've read the rest of the series only once, but I think that these ones are just really good ones, especially if you're trying to dabble in classics but want something that's a little bit more fun. If you read sci-fi, this one's a great one to pick up. I have watched the movie. I did enjoy the movie. I thought it was pretty well done. There are definitely a few inconsistencies between it and the book, but nothing that was glaringly painful. I think the biggest thing that I was confused on is that the rest of the siblings are missing. They have a whole big family. And so I don't know that they could really continue with the rest of the series making them into movies in that same universe because they don't didn't, from my memory, I don't feel like they had the rest of the siblings in there. Maybe they did and I'm just forgetting them, but it is supposed to be like a whole family. So I think that was the biggest thing. Movie was good. The next book, this one's a pretty recent read. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass That Bind Up. I'm going to go with a classic for a reason. This is one that people could really enjoy. I think it is mostly fascinating for the purposes of comparing what the original work was with all of the different retellings we have. Like, we have remade the story so many times that it's very fascinating to see what has changed, especially from somebody who didn't read it until they were an adult. This has just been common knowledge storylines in my life for a very long time. To then go read what it actually is, there's a lot of intermingling that we have done between the two books that are bound up in this. So that's just very interesting. It wasn't like my favorite read. I'm just not the best at enjoying books that are like, maybe magical realism is what this would fit into best, I guess, but where you're just expected to just completely suspend your disbelief and just go with the flow. There's not really a plot. This very much so feels like you're reading a dream. Things just like jump from place to place so quickly that it's a little bit hard to keep up with. I do think it is one that is worth taking the time to read, but it wasn't like one that I super enjoyed. Dr. Zhivago, I read at the beginning of last year. I'm going to go with maybe for someone else. Overall, I do really actually have a fascination with Russian classics specifically. You'll see there's a couple others on here, and I definitely have a lot more that I need to get into. So if you have recommendations of what one I should pick up next, please let me know. I do have Anna Karenina on my list of books that I would like to read that I actually own. Dr. Zhivago, I'm going to go with maybe for someone else because I don't know, this character I just really, really didn't like. So he is like, basically, they're in the middle of a war. I can't remember exactly which war. I don't know Russian history that well. He's a doctor who gets pulled off to go help be a doctor in the war. And you're following his relationships with 3 different women throughout the book. One is his wife at the beginning of the book. One of them is a lady that he like meets while he's out at war and has an affair with her, essentially. And then you have basically those two meet at some point. So then they both kind of are like, we don't want you in our life to him. And so then he ends up with another person at the end of the book. So really that's like the main thing happening in this book is you're following him as he goes around with all these different women and how that impacts their lives and things like that. So I don't know. I do think it could be very fascinating for certain people, but I personally didn't enjoy it. I struggle to follow characters. When it's such a character-driven book, I struggle to follow a character that I really just don't like. So that's how I felt about Dr. Zhivago. The next one is A Picture of Dorian Gray. Ooh, how controversial. I know a lot of people really love this book. This might be one of my least favorite classics, actually. So I'm going to go worst of times. This could go into maybe for someone else. I should probably put it there because I do know a lot of people love this, including my husband really likes this book. So I personally did not enjoy it that much. I read it mostly on a plane ride and while in France. But I don't know. It was really long-winded for something that I felt like you could have made the point way quicker. Again, very character-driven, and I just don't feel like I felt much sympathy for really any of the characters. So, not my favorite. And then this next one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with a whole bind up of short stories is how I read it. This one I'm going to go with classic for a reason. Definitely some of the short stories were more interesting than others. I definitely think as far as books that play on this topic of separating like the good qualities and attributes of yourself from the bad qualities, like Picture of Dorian Gray tries to talk on, I do think Dr. and Jekyll Hyde is a much shorter, more concise way to read that same topic. So it was great that these went back to back. Definitely some of them were better than others. Some of them were like, why did we feel the need to preserve this? It feels just so incomplete, but I feel like that's just kind of how short stories go overall. I think it is a good one if you want like a spooky season read, and definitely just another one of those that is so referenced in so many things that I think it's worth it to read the source material at some point in your life because so many people reference that book. Dracula. I'm going to go in Second Breakfast for this one. I think overall Dracula is good. It does get a little repetitive though, because you basically follow a whole storyline And then you get about halfway through the book, and we basically just start that exact same storyline over, just with slightly different characters. So that part did get a bit repetitive and boring for me, which is why I didn't love this one more. I do love spooky season books, and I do think Dracula obviously has just impacted so many things that everybody should read it at some point. But just be prepared, because you do basically follow through, like, one character goes through everything on his own, and then he goes back, and then you follow like a whole team of characters going through basically everything else. And it does get a little frustrating being like, how stupid could you be? We have done this before. Like, why are you not noticing that all the same stuff is happening again? So that part was a little frustrating and did bring my enjoyment down a little bit, but overall it was a good book and I would recommend. Frankenstein, I think I'm going to go classic for a reason. I definitely liked Dracula more than Frankenstein. This one was not quite what I expected it to be. It definitely, again, just as one that we have so much in pop culture that it is very intriguing to read what the original was, but it gets right into him building the monster so fast. Like, I expected a lot more lead up into him getting to the point of building the monster, so I feel like it's a little funny because you don't totally understand why he felt the need to go and do that. And you're like, where was the logic of thinking through? Like, I don't understand why you would ever think that that was a good idea. So definitely that part happens a little bit fast. And then you're following basically the consequences is most of this book. Honestly, I think I found the introduction in the edition that I was reading more fascinating than the actual book. It was basically talking about how she was friends with, I'm going to forget his name, Lord Byron. They were having like a scary storytelling competition, so she felt like she needed to come up with something good. And so she came up with this one. So that was a very fascinating one to read. But overall, I think it's a classic for a reason, and it's worth reading at some point, but it's not like my favorite one. And then Jo's Boys, I'm going to go and try and find this because this is a whole series that I did actually break out, mostly because I feel like a lot of people forget about it. I actually read these books out of order. So if you don't know, there's a Little Women trilogy. It's Little Women, Little Men, Jo's Boys. I had no idea that these were a series. So I actually read Little Men first, and then Little Women, and then Jo's Boys. So these were all part of a set of classics that my mom had that it was either in middle school or high school. She offered all of us kids like $100 to read the entire set of classics. And so I obviously took her up on that and read it, but somehow didn't get the message that those were a series, and so I definitely read them out of order. Little Women, I'm going to go with Second Breakfast. I think it's overall a good book. I definitely think we've had a lot of retellings, and I think we've had a lot of really accurate movies made off of it that match the book pretty well. I do really like the most recent one that came out. There's definitely some things that I don't feel like fit 100% perfect, but I felt like they did a really good job with that one. But yeah, overall Little Women's interesting. It is fun to see like a really accurate representation of families and siblings relationships and things like that, but overall it's not like my top favorite book. Little Boys I actually think might be my favorite of the series. I really liked that one. You're following, essentially, if you've read Little Women, it follows Jo, and she marries the German professor guy, whatever his name is, and then they start essentially like an orphanage / boarding school where they bring in all these boys and they're like teaching them and raising them. So the Little Men is following them boys when they're kids. And it's just really fun. I like seeing them. Jo is one of my favorite characters from Little Women, so I liked seeing more of her. Again, obviously I read this one first, so I just liked this book as it's on its own. And then I went and read Little Women and was able to make the connections between the two. And I was like, okay, that does make this really fun. You can read them in either order, but technically Little Women is first if you're following it chronologically. And then Jo's Boys is following maybe not all of them, but a bunch of those boys that Jo raises in her orphanage as adults, and as they grow up. And that one, I don't know. I think maybe Second Breakfast. It was really, really good, but I do think I liked Little Men better. I think that one's the standout of the series for me. It's very fascinating to watch Jo's Boys as you're watching all of these boys who were raised in the same environment grow up to be such different people. And it's very interesting to follow Jo as an older woman. You really get her whole lifespan as you go through these 3 books. That's the Little Women's trilogy. I really enjoy that one. Highly recommend, especially if you've read Little Women or you like the storyline of Little Women. Go read the other 2 books. Okay, this next one is also a pretty recent read. I read this started it while I was in Spain. This is a bind-up of 2 books. It's Lazarillo de Tormes and The Swindler. These are 2 picturesque Spanish novels, I guess. They're more like short stories. They're pretty novellas, maybe. I'm gonna go with Maybe for Someone Else. I don't have anything necessarily against these books. I just didn't really feel like there was any point to them. They're very like Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn-esque, where you're just following these little boys who just kind of get in trouble. That's kind of the whole storyline. They're fun, quick reads, but it's not anything overly special, in my opinion. Les Mis is one of those books I was talking about that I read in middle school purely for the AR points. To be completely honest, I don't know how much of this I comprehended, but I was a big musical theater kid, so I already knew the general gist of the plot from the musical, and so I knew enough that I probably could have passed the AR test without even reading it, but I was the kind of kid that wasn't going to do that, and so I went and read the entire unabridged version in middle school. So this one is one that I definitely need to do a reread of. For right now, I'm probably going to put it in second breakfast, but it could potentially go up on a reread now that I'm an adult and actually might be able to process it a little bit better. But I do love just the whole world. I love French history. I feel like they're just some really fascinating time periods in France. And I definitely think the book adds obviously so much more than what made it into the musical. So Les Mis is a good one. I don't know that I necessarily feel like everybody needs to read the full book in their lives, but definitely will be doing a reread of this at some point. I have a copy of it on my shelf downstairs that I need to read. Fellowship of the Ring is representing the Lord of the Rings, whatever you want to call it, series, book, I don't know, whatever you want to call that one. This is going to be representing all of the main books. The Hobbit I have on here separate. I feel like this one's probably a classic for a reason. I don't know that I loved the main storyline of The Lord of the Rings. It's very slow. Very slow, but I do feel like it's shaped the fantasy genre so much that it's definitely worth giving a read at some point, just because of the impact that it has had on so many things within the fantasy genre. So I do feel like everybody should read it at some point, but it's not like my favorite. The Master and Margarita. This one was interesting. I go back and forth. I feel like parts of it I really enjoyed, parts of it I kind of was just like, I'm lost. I think that this one's also going to go in a Maybe for Someone Else. I think everyone should give it a try at some point. If you liked Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and you want more of an adult version of that, do Master and Margarita, which I know is probably the weirdest comparison, but I keep making it because they're both very much so following this like magical realism. You just have to kind of go with the flow. Weird things are happening and you just need to accept them. I don't know that I got like the point of Master and Margarita. I feel like there's definitely some social commentary in there that I just went over my head. So there is that. I don't really have much more to say than that. I definitely think everyone should give it a try at some point, but just know that you may either love it or you may just be totally confused like me. To Kill a Mockingbird. This one I'm going to go with classic for a reason. I don't know that I loved this book particularly. I feel like I just didn't really connect with any of the characters, but I do feel like it is one that everyone should read at some point, and there is a reason that it has gotten put in the classics category. This one obviously has some very important topics and things in it, but I personally didn't love it to the point where I'm going to go and be like, you need to read this one immediately, but you should at some point. And I do have the second book on my shelf and I really need to read it at some point, but I feel like I might need to do a reread. So opinion might change on a reread of To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't know. We'll see. This next one is The Count of Monte Cristo. This one I read during COVID, super random, but I read it really fast because I was working in a branch at a credit union, which I wasn't what I was actually hired to do. They put us there because they didn't have anything for us to do in the events department. So we got moved into there, and we didn't really have anything to do. So I just sat and read until they came up with something that I could help with. So I read this one pretty quick, actually. I'm going to go with Best of Times, I think. I actually quite like the storyline of Count of Monte Cristo. This one's definitely a long one, but it's very funny and it's very interesting. I feel like my biggest thing that I find funny with this one is watching all of the adaptations of it because nobody has made one that is accurate to the plot whatsoever. A lot of them change the plot to the point where you are changing the key takeaway. And it's so funny to watch everybody make these versions of it where he has a happy ending and he is not supposed to have an happy ending because the whole point of this book, in my personal opinion, is that you are following him, try and get revenge on everybody, and in the process of destroying their lives, he also totally destroys his life. And so it's this whole look at is revenge really worth it? Because you're going to end up doing just as much damage to yourself by holding on to those grudges as you were doing to anybody else that you're trying to get revenge on. So when we change the plot, I feel like a lot of people are changing that big takeaway. But overall, I really like the book. Would recommend. I know a lot of people all of a sudden on the internet are trying to like read it this summer. So maybe I will participate. We'll see. I have other books that I do want to read that are kind of long. So not sure, but I would like to do a reread of this at some point. Night. I read this one for my college English class, actually. I have a hard time ranking ones that are nonfiction, especially ones that are about really difficult topics, because it's a little hard to be like, yeah, I loved this book, when mostly this book just made me feel sad. I don't know. I'm somewhere in between. It's a classic for a reason and Second Breakfast. I think I'm gonna go Second Breakfast. I feel like, again, everybody should read this at some point. It's not going to be a book that makes you feel good. So it's hard to say, like, I didn't know necessarily feel like I can say I enjoyed this book because it's just such a heavy book that I don't know that that's the right terminology, but I do think it's a really well written book and one that everybody should read at some point. I also like recently discovered that there's more, like it's a series. So at some point I probably will try and go read those. It's a well written book. Okay, next one is Palace Walk. This one's probably not the most like well-known classic. I read this for my Around the World in Books challenge. This was my pick for Egypt, and if you've watched that video, you know I have kind of mixed feelings on this book, but I'm going to go again with a maybe for someone else. I feel like I just sometimes struggle with these books that are like family sagas where you're just like following a family. This one is a trilogy. I've only read the first book, and I just feel like this would be really good for somebody who likes really character-driven books. I personally love a good plot. I also really, really didn't like being in the heads of certain characters and following them. So when it's such a character driven book and there are characters that I just did not like, it just made me feel icky to be in their point of view that I didn't like. So honestly, I don't know, like I get it's a classic, so it's kind of hard to put classics, but this might even be a worst of times. Like this was probably one of my least favorite books on the list. It's not my most least favorite. There's another one that I'm specifically making this category for, but overall, I don't know that I'd super recommend it to anyone unless you are like really specifically interested in that time period in Egyptian history, because I feel like that's really the main thing that it's good for. The Scarlet Pimpernel. This one is one of the earlier ones on this list of when I read it. I did reread it as an adult, so I've read it twice. I do think that this one's really fun. I also think the musical's really fun. It doesn't fit the plot very well, but it does have a lot of really fun songs. So just if you're looking for fun music. Scarlet Pimpernel, I'm going to go Second Breakfast. It's not my favorite ever, but it is good. I do really enjoy it. I have reread it, so that gives you kind of an idea of how I felt about it, but it's not going to be one that I like go raving about. A Tale of Two Cities. If you could not tell by the fact that I used this as my reference for my tears, this one is a best of times book for me. I love The Tale of Two Cities. This one's another one that I read for the first time in middle school. I have reread it since. I know a lot of people don't love Charles Dickens' writing, and I actually haven't read a single other Charles Dickens book. So I have on my list Great Expectations, and just in general, I need to read some more of his books, but I actually really like Tale of Two Cities. It can be a little bit confusing. I will grant people that it takes a second. I remember the first time I read it being really confused for about the first half, because you keep jumping back and forth between England and Paris, and you're jumping back and forth, and it's just like, what's going on? And then finally about halfway through the book, all the characters start to converge, and then it becomes one single storyline, and it starts to make a lot more sense. So as a middle schooler, I definitely found it very hard to follow. Knowing the plot, rereading it definitely made it easier to follow. I knew what was going on a lot. This one also has a musical based off of it that is very accurate. I would listen to the musical, get to know the musical first, because it makes it really easy. It makes it a lot easier to remember who these characters are, I feel like, and then go read the book, and honestly, I think it's a lot easier that way. I do love Tale of Two Cities. If you have any other Charles Dickens books that you think I should read next, I do own Great Expectations, so that's probably the next one I'm going to read, but let me know what other ones I should pick up. The Art of War, another very random one that I read at a very young age. This one also might have been middle school, maybe early high school. I found parts of this book very fascinating, and I am very glad that I read it. It feels wrong to put it in worst of times because I did really enjoy parts of it. But I definitely skim read every time it got to like trying to explain the genealogy of who these people were, because I just did not have enough context of their history in order to be able to understand what I was talking about. Like, I had no idea what all these different dynasties meant. I mean, it's definitely not a book that provides context, but if you just kind of are willing to skim read certain parts until you get to the parts where it's explaining different maneuvers, it is fascinating. So there's my 2 takes on that one. I don't know that I feel like I would recommend it to anyone particularly, but I do feel really proud of the fact that I've read it. So there is that. Granted, I did skim read a decent amount of it. So that's The Art of War. I don't know that I can really think of many people that I think would enjoy this one, or that it necessarily has much of a reason to need to be such a classic, but I did read it and it was fine. So that's that. The Book Thief. We actually have several that I really enjoyed in this next little bit. So our top tiers are about to get pretty big, but The Book Thief is one that I also love. I read this one at a very young age and I really need to do a reread of it. It is a World War II book. You're following this little girl who, I believe, again, it's been a while since I've read it, but I believe she is like gets hired to clean someone's house and basically finds a book, and you're following her as she learns to really love reading at a time period when books were being burned and books were being highly censored, and she is just trying to get her hands on any book she possibly can because she just doesn't have good access to them because of the world she's living in. It's definitely a bit of a sadder book. And it's honestly kind of heavy for being kind of pitched as a middle grade book. Like, I feel like I read it really young. I don't think I was quite in elementary school, but I was definitely middle school by the time I read this one. A really, really good book. I definitely need to do a reread. This is definitely one that I recommend to lots of people if they're looking for a World War II book. This one's good. The Giver by Lois Lowry is one of my favorite books of all time, not just classics. I really, really love The Giver. I've read the whole series. I love the whole series. So read the whole quartet. They're all really good. They definitely feel a little disjointed because you're following kind of a different main character every single book, but I feel like the last one kind of brings them back together and makes it make sense. But it's a very fascinating world. It's very, like, I guess it would be considered a dystopian. And each book is following someone who grew up in a totally different part of this dystopia world. And so it's interesting to see how each city gets, once it's totally cut off from the rest of the world, how it develops. So you have one in The Giver, which I feel like people know decently well. That one's gotten pretty big. That is very tech forward. You're only allowed to have a certain number of kids. Very structured, more classic dystopia. And then in one of the later books, I think it's the second book, you're following one that very much so went back to being like an agricultural, they have no technology. So it feels almost like an entirely different world, but it is totally a look at if we separate and basically pretend like the rest of the world, it doesn't exist, how do we create these little individual micro systems? Very fascinating. I really enjoy this author's writing, and I definitely want to read more books by them. I have read Number the Stars, which I didn't include on this list, but it probably could have been. I also really love that one. I read it for the first time in 5th grade. We read it as a class. Another very, very solid book. So I definitely want to read more books by Lois Lowry. And then we have The Hobbit. This one I do like significantly more than the other Lord of the Rings books. The Hobbit is actually probably one of my best at times books. I'm actually currently rereading this one, so really, really enjoy The Hobbit. It's a fun time, just classic story. Again, it's just so good. I don't really have a ton to say about it, but it is really, really good. Highly recommend. Narnia, The Whole World. I just put Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe. I have read the whole series multiple times since I was a kid. This one, again, is a little tricky because it probably depends on the book, but I would say overall, if we're looking at the series as a whole, I'd go with Second Breakfast. I think there are definitely books that could be bumped up, but overall, I'd say they're here. There's definitely some that get a little more boring. Lion and Witch in the Wardrobe obviously is the most talked about, the most adapted, but I do really like the other ones. One of my favorite books from the series is actually The Horse and His Boy. Really enjoy that book. And I personally think now would be the best time to go and remake it as a movie and pull all of the original kids from Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe movie in as the older versions of themselves, because the timing would be just about right to make that. The Name of the Rose. This is specifically the book that I wanted this bottom category for. I did not like this book at all. It was very much so pitched to me as Italian monk Sherlock Holmes. It is not at all like that. That is the teeniest portion of this book. So I just don't know. I think it was just pitched to me so wrong. This is much more of a very slow Monk book, there is like a murder mystery happening, and he is a bit of a detective, but he's just not a very interesting detective. First of all, most of the stuff they just like happen upon, you are mostly following his like assistant guy who's like this kid that he has brought on and has not trained whatsoever. So it's mostly this kid just like stumbling around making a mess of everything, and then like Monk's getting in arguments about theological things that don't make sense. So I didn't love it. The ending is really anticlimactic. It's just, I would not recommend this book to anyone. And then back to one of my all-time favorite books. This is The Robe. I love this book so much. I've read it a couple of times now. And I definitely want to do a reread again and actually annotate it. I love, love, love this book. It's basically it's a historical fiction book about one of the soldiers who was assigned to crucify Jesus, and you're following him in the like aftermath of that and how it affected his life. Fascinating, really interesting look into Greek society at the time. Just such a good book. I can't say enough about it. I love this one so much. This is one of my favorite books of all time, not just classics. And then this next one is really cut off, but I'm pretty sure this one's The Secret Garden. So I don't know why it really has trimmed. I probably should have switched this so that they were vertical images, but oh well, too late now. I'm pretty sure this one's supposed to be The Secret Garden. This one is another one that I'm going to go with classic for a reason. It's not like my all-time favorite book ever, but it is a very interesting one. The more I think about it, I do feel like it could probably go up to Second Breakfast. It is a fun little story about these two little kids. It's very magical. It would be a good spring one. The musical's really good. It has some fun characters. I do think the character growth of the two kids and honestly a lot of the adults around them is just very interesting. It's just such a like fun little heartwarming book. Uncle Tom's Cabin. This one is another one that I would say is a classic for a reason. I don't know that I necessarily like particularly enjoyed the writing style of this book, but I do think everybody should read it at some point. I think it pairs well with To Kill a Mockingbird. I think it's a time period we need to talk about more and consume more content about, specifically in the United States. It's not like the most fascinating, fun book you'll ever read, but it is a very important one that I feel like a lot of people should read. War and Peace. This one also probably is going to make me look crazy, but I really love War and Peace. It's going to go in my best of times. I've read it twice. The second time I did go and do a full annotate. That video is on my channel from last summer, actually. So we're coming up on a year of the last time I reread it. But I think that Tolstoy is actually hilarious, and it definitely takes a bit of reading to find his humor, but I do think that he is really funny, and he's really like snarky, and there's just a lot of good lines. So I definitely want to read more Tolstoy. Again, I think I mentioned it already, but I have Anna Karenina on my shelf. I want to read that one. I also really want to read, I've seen some people talk about his like journals, like there's like a bind up of his like journals or something like that. And I do think that one would be very fun to read. So not sure how to find it because I've never seen it at like Barnes and Noble or anything, so might have to order that one online. But do love that. Definitely need to read more Tolstoy. Things Fall Apart. This one I'm going to go with maybe for someone else. This is another one that is like fully character driven, and I just am more of a plot person, so I definitely think there are people that could really love this. I feel like my husband liked this one quite a bit. He's actually who recommended it to me, but I personally struggle a little bit with books that are fully just like following characters, and that's really what this is. And then the final book on this list is The Alchemist. I'm going to go I feel like it's somewhere in between maybe for someone else and a classic for a reason. We'll settle on maybe for someone else. I don't know that I feel like this one is so impactful that I think it like is required reading for everybody, but I could see how people like it. I feel like my dad really liked it. We gave it to him to read, and he's the type of person that I feel like really, really enjoyed it. But personally, I feel like it was just kind of like nothing particularly new. Again, I just feel like some of these books, I'm just like, I don't know if I'm getting the point. Like, I feel like it's just not connecting. Maybe at a different time in my life, I would find this much more interesting, but I just personally feel like it was not anything particularly groundbreaking for me. So I think if you read this book at the right time, this could be a book that was really impactful, or if you were just in the right mindset. But personally, I didn't find it anything super special. So that's my tier ranking of all of the classics I've read and actually remember reading. Definitely there are more that I know I've read. Like I know I've read Moby Dick, but I read it as a kid and I'm not even sure if I read the full book or if it was like a kid abridged version. There are tons of books like that I'm like, did I read the full book or did I just read like the kid version of it? Not really sure. So I picked the ones that I knew enough, I remembered enough to have an opinion on. So that's my tier ranking. Let me know, what are your opinions on these books? Do you have any that were differ from mine? And do you have any recommendations based off of the classics that I liked of which ones I should add to my list? I feel like I've mentioned most of them that I have on my list to read soon, or like that I have the physical books of. But if you have any other recommendations of ones that I should definitely add to my TBR, let me know and I will add them. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up because it has been very long. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one very soon. Bye.